Welcome to our colleagues around the world in Africa and other places where people might be streaming this seminar this afternoon. It's a really great event. It's a real privilege to those of you in the audience and those that are streaming to hear a reflection on a world-renowned scientist on their contribution and career, their contribution to the ICRISAT mandate for helping small farmers around the world. So I, being somewhat of the older generation, have been to a number of these events, and I always think it brings a smile to my face, and I think about the career and the contribution that people make. And this afternoon we get to hear from Cynthia Bantilan about her fantastic contribution to smallholder farming systems around the world, to the field of resource economics, social and economic sciences, to her work here in India and Asia, for the time she spent in sub-Saharan Africa when she was based in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Her reflections on that career, reflections on ICRISAT's mandate and the contribution that she's seen with herself and her team as Research Program Director for Markets, Institutions and Policy Program. It really is a privilege to be able to introduce Cynthia after her almost 24 years at ICRISAT. And I'm sure that Cynthia in retirement is not going to play golf like some of us will. I'm pretty sure that Cynthia is going to continue to work and contribute. Before asking her to step up here, I should have introduced myself. I'm Peter Carberry. I'm here to do two things: to welcome Cynthia, but also to congratulate India on beating Australia in the cricket last night. I thought we were going to win that game up until about the 16th over, but Virat Kohli is a very good player. So congratulations. Hope you go all the way and win the thing. So congratulations. But anyway, back to the main game. Cynthia, please come and reflect on this marvellous career and tell us about where we should go to next.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. And I'm very pleased that you are here, and I know our colleagues in Africa are there. They're already awakened. And I think it's still morning in Niger, Mali, and Nigeria, and about lunchtime in Eastern Southern Africa. When Peter asked me to deliver a seminar, he said, "You don't even have to prepare, just reflect." And that's what I've done, but I need to prepare, Peter. And in that preparation, I think it's very important that the outline of my work at ICRISAT, reflecting on the 23 years and 4 months experience, I'll be reflecting on a timeline. So my timeline at ICRISAT starts when Jim Ryan, then the DG of ICRISAT, told me while we were riding in the same car, he said, "You know, I've been designated the DG of ICRISAT, and I'll be going there in 6 months' time. I'd like to hire you to be the principal economist to help me support research management." And I said, "Oh, I have a big project. I need to finish it." And he said, "We'll wait for 1 year." So he waited for 1 year, and the terms of reference of that assignment was just a 2-year stint at ICRISAT to establish the research evaluation and impact assessment. And that is what became the popular RIA, where scientists across programs, resource management, breeding, and economics became part of RIA. I can see some of them even here. Harry is one of them. And each of the crops were represented, and each of the regions were represented. That RIA program, I called it, for research evaluation and impact assessment, lasted for about 7 years. Until the time in 1999, they sought for a program director. I applied for that program directorship for a program that will be established in Africa. And that program, I thought, is a challenge because not only will be Africa challenging, it will be challenging to lead a social science program. I've always been a member and a leader of a small project like RIA, although it became large across the globe also. And I lived and moved in Zimbabwe starting 1999 until its economic downturn in 2002 for 3 years, and came back to India to lead the coordination of the various external reviews, Center Commissioned External Review, the full blast external review in the early 2000s, which demanded me to be in headquarters all the time. And at that time, research for ICRISAT became really a commitment that combines both management of research as well as real research. And that real research took among many things that I've done into research, I chose two to present to you. Being involved and diving deep into the various researches of the scientists is what I do. But diving deep into the researches in an ADB-funded project on vulnerability and adaptation to climate change, and another, which is the village-level studies revival, became the village dynamic studies, were really very close to my heart. And I've chosen to say that for this seminar, I'll have two parts. Part one on the research evaluation and impact assessment, which culminated into ICRISAT being cited as the best in impact assessment across all of the CGIAR, and the work on adaptation strategies and VLS. Part two will really be on the village dynamic studies and looking at how we complement macro and meso dimensions or insights, and then the middle part is I relegated this to the most important part of our event today, which is a book launching, because with the help of the team, Naveen and Nedu, Baijesh, and all our colleagues all over the world, actually completed and published a CABI International book, which will be launched today. So we've invited them here for this purpose. Now, my timeline is not finished because there are next steps ahead. I'm looking forward, very excited to come home, go home to the Philippines because they're waiting for me there. And my last flight from Manila to the Philippines, I was flying with the economic minister. And he said, we're waiting for you. And so please come home as soon as possible. So the next step ahead, I called it, it's open. I haven't committed yet, but in some ways nodded informally to some. But very exciting, I should say. So the milestones that I prefer to share with you today, among the many research activities that I've done, will be really looking at the first 7 years of my life at ICRISAT on research evaluation impact assessment. The next 9 years is when we will be looking at really strategy refresh and adaptation strategies at the farm level, which then culminated in a Geneva conference in 2010, and ICRISAT was a main player in that Geneva conference looking at highlights of policy for the global community. And then, of course, closest to our heart, you know, whenever you talk about Cynthia, we're looking at village-level studies and village dynamic studies with a team led by Uttam Deb. This village dynamic studies in Bangladesh and India was implemented. So in part one, I shall reflect. It's really a historical narrative of the work. It will not last so many hours, but the key realization that's very important for me to share is that the impacts at the farm level is real, but still not enough. And the main message I will say is that the poor actually deserves more, not less. And the key findings of research at the 7 years, which I presented at the World Bank, it's an Intercenters Week, it happens every year, in 1997, actually was something that boosted my confidence because I will be sharing with you, in fact, the key results of the 7 years of work, wherein ICRISAT World Bank Evaluation Team Advisor, Jack Anderson, says is the most effective. He was asked to evaluate all the presentations of the CGIAR, and he cited ICRISAT's the most effective impact assessment among all CGIAR presentations of that particular Intercenters Week. And that's a memo of the DG himself citing it. And I'd like to now share the fact that ICRISAT serves the SAT region. And let me more seriously say that the focus on the 5 mandate crops, including now expansion to finger millet, in cereals as well as in legumes. with its aim, remains twofold. We always hear about it, to increase food production where crops are dominant, or these crops are dominant, and to provide an efficient technology that will allow sustainable management of the systems of the semi-arid tropics, in the semi-arid tropics. And ICRISAT, with its marginalized environment as its domain of responsibility, really had the support of donors. And ICRISAT responded very well because it actually increased the knowledge base. Talk about SAT, ICRISAT gives you the name of the game. Increased the knowledge base of the semi-arid tropics. It provided training across Africa and Asia. Some of our trainees are here from the Philippines. It's so wonderful that you are here. Built an extensive research facility in the Sahel where none existed before, and introduced new crops in traditional cropping systems. And with the support of many donors, listed among here, we're able to implement research on the semi-arid tropics. And ICRISAT's output, which is the third red mark there, the new knowledge and improved technologies that enhance production and consumption patterns affects welfare gains among the SAT poor. And so we've developed from this simple framework a framework that features an expanded unifying notion for impact assessment. And the four aspects are again in red. They're highlighting the fact that ICRISAT has succeeded. ICRISAT's successes are real, an inventory of technologies are documented, the extent of adoption in farmers' fields, and measures of impact of this in our SAT clientele, our domain of responsibility. And in fact, in a compendium that we've developed, and it's published in 1997, we established that, and we have shown that the contribution to hundreds of improved cultivars through the national programs in 70 countries, in fact, around the world. And these releases have been grown across the various domains in millions of hectares. And it's in here in various regions in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and regions of Latin America even, that we've experienced yield advantages over currently sown cultivars. And these are some of the documentations that have been presented, and we have continued to document this from then, ranging at that time from 0.3 tons for chickpea and 0.64 tons for sorghum, representing yield advantages of about 18 to 43%. This has made ICRISAT proud of the various dimensions of impact. And these dimensions we have documented on food security, in achieving more stable grain yield than those traditionally grown by farmers in the SAT. Second is biodiversity, in maintaining the diverse genetic resources of our staple food crops through the collection of useful genetic materials, conserved safely by ICRISAT for the future plant breeding efforts. And it goes on to increased income, sustained productivity, benefits to women, spillover effects, on up to NAR's capacity building, that is, the training, the capacity building that enables the adoption and adaptation of these plant materials in the national program, as well as the skill set for development, have helped thousands and thousands, not only of scientists, but also technicians from Africa, especially where we had this specialized program in Asia, Latin America, and by the way, at that time, we also had program in Latin America, and other regions to improve their skills. Now, the dimensions and the assessment of these dimensions of impact actually continued. And it continued in zest, even as we have established independent impact assessment unit. And this must continue through the established impact assessment office or its various way in which this can be institutionalized henceforth. Now, it's in this case that we actually had teams. We call them RIA teams. I cite Harry as one of them, and all of the breeders from across, not only in ICRISAT, but also in the national programs where members of these teams, comprising of ICRISAT and NOAA scientists, actually worked hand in hand to measure their joint impacts on farm. And we started with our assessments by confirming first adoption, because adoption is a condition for impact. And we asked the question, to what extent has technologies for the semi-arid tropics reached farmers? And lo and behold, when I came, we had a mix of results. We found that adoption levels span a range of as low as, across all of these regions in Africa and Asia, less than about 10% to about 60% at that time of the area of recommendation domains for different technologies. And the reasons for high adoption versus low adoption are investigated in each stage, in each case, and actually form a valuable learning opportunity which can improve the efficiency of the research process over time. And now I think it's a good time to present a selection of this, highlights of completed work, in which adoption has been reflected into real-time impact. And I would say, let's give as example an impact on efficiency. There's a case study of fusarium wilt resistance in pigeon pea, and based on the on-farm, farm-level adoption and impact surveys on wilt endemic regions in central India, and that is where we've done the study. And as you can see, various measurable indicators of impact, which converts yield gains and unit cost reduction into net present value of benefits. From these gains equal to even $75 billion, and considering research costs, an internal rate of return of about 65%. Now, to my students of impact, these are the standard. And all of those who I've trained even across Africa and Asia, these are my minimum requirements to produce these indicators. The second series actually is a case where we assessed food security in marginal areas in 6 countries in Africa, in Chad, Cameroon, and Zimbabwe, and the neighboring countries of Botswana, Zambia, and Mali. And it's in here that the adoption of early maturing cultivars for sorghum and millets in Chad, Cameroon, and Zimbabwe actually confirmed improved food security in drought-prone areas. And we secured reasonable yields during drought years, while local land races actually failed. And that was very apparent in Southern and Eastern Africa when I was actually there. And we note that savings in food aid is far greater than the cost of research. Now, let's not forget sustainability. This dimension was examined in the assessment of short-duration legumes. And in this case, the diversification of monocrop systems by introducing short-duration pigeon peas in India. And our results show 57% adoption in drought-prone areas, and diffusion occurring across 5 states around it, new opportunities for double cropping were presented, and an important connection was actually established between adoption and the farmer's perception that crop rotation, in fact, with pigeon peas helps maintain soil fertility. Now, gender-related impacts were very important, and they were also determined. An introduction of raised bed practices in groundnut production benefited women as well. I have a picture here where the groundnut production technology resulted in reducing the difficulty of weeding and harvesting, and the increased yields actually raised the level of farmer employment for harvesting and pod shelling. And these benefits also resulted in increased role of women in making decisions at home and in the farm about the use of inputs and growing the crop, and about the utilization of this crop for food versus oil in the home. This is very specific results coming out of this study. Now, I'd like to move now into partnerships, because partnerships in action achieved jointly are joint impacts by ICRISAT, NARS, and the private sector. And this important collaboration is a story of many dimensions, including huge payoff to strong partnership among international, national, and private sector, which effective use of the global gene pool, an application of cutting-edge science using molecular markers for gains in breeding efficiency towards the control of downy mildew epidemics, in this particular case. And in fact, in recognition of the work that had been done during that time, the CGI granted its highest accolade, the King Bedouin Award, to ICRISAT, about the time that we're doing this in 1996. Now, this partnership in action, furthermore, if we dig deeper, is illustrated by an aggregate picture which highlights two phases showing the share of ICRISAT, the NARS, and the private sector. I'll call phase one a phase where, before the 90s, the early 90s, it represents a phase where ICRISAT and the public sector shares dominated the market. But in phase two, after 1991, it represents a period where the private sector started with a policy change, has grown and flourished. And the graph here actually highlights this, the role of ICRISAT and the NARS and the increasing role of the private sector at about that time. And this graph highlights the role ICRISAT has played in providing final products to farmers, to the NARS, and supplying parental materials to the seed sector, which now in India and other countries has the capability of delivering seeds to farmers. This pearl millet downy mildew drama provided a striking illustration of how an international research investment like ICRISAT's can trigger subsequent waves of investment by the national, public, and private sectors, creating a local research base to underpin further progress. So, in summary, I should say that our sample at the time of completed studies show a range of internal rates of return for technologies adopted in various countries, ranging from 11 to 65%. And new income streams of particular benefit to the poorest of the poor and generated from just the 20 selection that we've done, out of the hundreds jointly released cultivars, amount to a minimum of 232 million, or more than 10 times the annual budget of all of ICRISAT at that time and even now at this time. So on balance, what have we learned? These assessments brought out lessons, both of successes, and let's not forget, we also had failures. The successes provided confirmations that justify past investments as well as reasons for successful adoption, as well as failures giving us the constraints provided feedback on factors critical to adoption, and cases that form basis for research redirection, and priority setting. And on reasons that I'm showing here for enhanced adoption, our analysis show that technologies which result in high levels of adoption and impact are typically those that address vital farmers' needs. That is, enhance household security, enhance household income, reduce risk, and increase number of options available to them through crop diversification. Now, on constraints to adoption and looking at some examples of failures, for resource management technologies, despite tangible results in on-farm testing of technically viable management options, the level of adoption has been below expectations. To my surprise, the case of the broadbed and farrow in India was examined alongside its introduction across the whole of India and across different countries in Africa. And this is a technology, actually, which has been designed to alleviate waterlogging in heavy soils. The constraints identified are, it was introduced in areas where waterlogging was not the main constraint. So how can it be taken an uptake there if it's not a constraint? And there were introducing equipments that were unaffordable or unusable to small farmers. And of course, the increasing higher labor cost was already starting at that time. Lesson learned is the importance of targeting. Better targeting in design and dissemination to match farmers' needs. Not only their needs and capacities, because this will result to a more successful uptake, as it has happened in the same technology when introduced in Ethiopia. A lesson drawn from another case is on high-yielding groundnuts, where these high-yielding groundnuts, high-yielding, in fact, we went to Guntur and all these places with Partha at that time, but they were not taken up because farmers placed actually a higher premium on early maturing, especially in drought-prone areas. And this led our scientists to refocus on early maturing germplasm. Now, all of these results or samples of results came from an independent research evaluation and impact assessment project. And now I see Suhaswani was also part of the RIA team at the time. And we come to realize that this initiation by ICRISAT actually has advantages that were realized. First, there was harmonization. Second, we have a focal point on which the project serves as its focal point for research evaluation. Not only in ICRISAT, but also among the national programs. It ensured a consistency and objectivity in methodology, as well as empirical estimation. It houses the impact and research priority setting database, and enables an explicit linkage between priority assessment and ex-ante impact studies. Now, you will see the history here, whereby now, at this stage, we'll be producing the last completion of this work through a book that we are publishing, in which we will be looking at the linkages of ex-ante and ex-post priorities. Now, ICRISAT's challenge today is really good and binding, but it's very important to note that this impact are very important. It is very important to get it also cited at the highest levels in the CGIAR. So let me show some of this. The CGIAR Standing Panel for Impact Assessment featured this work on spillover research benefits of ICRISAT research across many crops. A work that I've done with Uttam Deb while he was a postdoc, where he traveled across Asia and traveled across Africa to undertake this work, is actually one that's been cited by the Science Council as particularly of high quality and emerging best practice. There is this book, again, done with many scientists across the globe. I remember Obilana, Tunde Obilana was part of this. Again, Uttam was a main player, where this recognition of the book has been a good example of emerging best practice. But the role of the breeders, the scientists, both in Asia and Africa, were very, very critical in the development of this particular book, which the CG Science Council and SPIA has given recognition. We also dealt with methodologies and NRM impacts, and I would cite that the book led by Bekele Schifferau and our team in what we call then socioeconomics and policy program is an example of this. And more recently, another SPIA feature of ICRISAT impact is chickpea impact assessment, looking at the particular revolution that's happened in India and how it spread to Myanmar and how it's spreading to the parts of southern Eastern Africa. This is work done with Kumar, Purangar, as well as Jeff Davis. Now, I cited this book already, but linking ex-ante and ex-post assessments is very important, because now that simple framework that we have developed actually gives you a mechanism by which the linking process of ex-ante and ex-post gives a feedback mechanism into research priorities and an input into ex-post assessment, whereby that simple framework actually now has been made more in-depth and in detail, where now we're looking at the importance of research domains, the importance of economic variables like unit cost reduction, and the applicability of this internationally. so that we will find that this linkage process will be an avenue by which new research opportunities may be identified from information and farmers' perceptions of binding constraints and desirable traits in management practices, and feedback on factors limiting adoption, as well as lessons learned on the comprehensive studies that what are these factors enabling or limiting production. And on the other hand, it also have the feedback loop in the process of documenting the exposed impact using both primary and secondary data, where important insights may be derived that can help better inform ex-ante priority setting. Has it really been implemented in ICRISAT, and has it ever been implemented in any CGIAR? The question we asked, and we said, indeed, it has happened, it started to happen already, and we have examples of that, and we've done the calculations, and they are really very encouraging. And so in the institutionalization process, which I emphasize, even in the government of the Philippines, and the government of Thailand, Indonesia, in Asia, as well as the governments in Mali and Kenya and Tanzania, it's very important that we have a framework, that feedback process, that will help guide the institutionalization, linking ex-ante more on the priority setting to expose impact. And that book hopefully will come out as another launching by December. Now, today's challenges are real. Our challenge is to advance the scientific base of genetic enhancement, going beyond, and we have to grow beyond the commodity paradigm. I think ICRISAT is already doing that, with increased focus on resource management, social sciences, with increasing the voices of the poor for the modernization of systems in the semi-arid tropics. As we face stubborn poverty for the millions who remain poor, and they are not declining in terms of number, the stagnant production and profitability in traditional cropping systems, the meager water and soil resources, encroaching deserts in already fragile lands, as well as climate change, and markets that needs to be stimulated to transform in terms of agriculture and various sectors. So it's in renewed mission. ICRISAT now is taking high priority on these areas, on the pervasive problem of drought, taking emphasis on watershed and catchment areas approaches. And you can see that from the Buchatena in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, and it's moving beyond. Introducing new crops for resilient farming systems. New science tools, including social sciences, which provide rapid advances in areas previously thought to already be intractable. Now we are tracking it. Forge enhanced partnerships. And finally, as we are always encouraged, critically spread the word. We must be more effective in articulating the importance and effectiveness of the work so that the donors, developing country governments, and other stakeholders will grasp the significance and capitalize on our potentials. And I would say that in summary of the first part of my presentation, which is in the last minutes, is that ICRISAT remains vital to this mission in the CGIAR. In this 4 decades of existence, it has the recognition of its scientific excellence, despite its ups and downs in terms of funding, has expanded the facilities and developed the scientific program in the North and Sub-Saharan Africa especially, stimulated exchange of germplasm, information, and technologies among national programs, pioneered socioeconomic research using village-level studies to assess impact, and strengthened the NARS through training and network. So the road ahead is clear. ICRISAT works with its partners to enhance prosperity, create diversified opportunities, protect fragile environments, and promote inclusiveness among all those involved in the research and development process. So in this way, we are confident that as an organization, serving as a model of all other organizations all over the world, the support of our stakeholders will help achieve a food-secure future for the millions of poor of the semi-arid tropics who deserves no less. And therefore, we continue to interact across regions, across programs, and this is my last picture of involvement of resource management. Oh, Rajiv is there, representing the crop improvement scenario. This is one of our last social scientist program. It's a social scientist retreat where we involve the other programs as well, especially the program directors, to look at a holistic perspective. And lo and behold, now that we have the innovation systems with the idea of having this holistic perspective, at that time, even then, we were looking at the system on understanding the trade-offs, the social, economic, environmental, institutional, resource management, whereby we serve as a bridge on the new knowledge coming from agricultural science, complementing with plausible scenarios and global foresight, and grassroots level insights from the village level studies to influence policy. A system by which socioeconomic and biophysical constraints and dimensions are incorporated, looking at both constraints and potential opportunities. It is where the realization of the importance of grassroots level insights through the village level studies brings about an opportunity for us to share how closely we worked with farmers, an opportunity given by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to work in 42 villages across India and Bangladesh. And in the 6 years of experience, to produce an added new perspective, a holistic one, in fact. And this means not only raising the voices of the poor, which was our mantra, but understanding the trade-offs in a systems perspective. And this draws on now on how both micro-level, household-level perspective blends with macro and meso-level perspective, with the key questions critical to be identified, blending the transformation process both at the meso and macro level through insights and policy implications. And the very specific research questions I'd like to emphasize are as follows. Agriculture transformation in India and Bangladesh. What is the extent and directions of change? What are the drivers of change? And what are the implications of this and research findings on research, policies, and development instruments? And in fact, to do this at the micro level, we start with a set of deeper questions. Has rapid growth benefited the dryland farmers? Who's our target? Why among all parts of India, Eastern India is lagging behind? And how can we promote inclusive growth in Eastern India? What has happened to poverty reduction in dryland areas? And in Bangladesh, is there evidence showing that those price hikes and fluctuations increase rural poverty? Now, yet deeper questions is how did farmers in India and Bangladesh, across all of these agroecological zones, from semi-arid tropics to the humid tropics, respond to rising agricultural wages? Actually, what has happened to the labor class over time? Are they better off? Why is the reverse tendency expanding the dryland agriculture in India? And as the work of Uttam Dev said, yes, indeed it's happening. And in this case, how do farmers and the villagers cope with persistent drought over the decade? And how have they come out of poverty? And deeper questions then get answered at the macro level, whereby the responses at the household individual level comes about to analyze how the exogenous shocks at the macro level affect the supply response in investments in agriculture regionally across South Asia. With the question is, how formal credit flow does it make a difference to smallholders and the rural poor? And women and children, are they experiencing the double burden of malnutrition? And feminization, is it a myth or a reality? So as we blend meso-level perspective in the agricultural transformation process with a micro-level perspective at the household level, it's in fact become a learning journey towards realizing policy implications. Now, the next parts of the presentation will be very interesting to the policymakers. And in fact, what I'd like to show in a fast manner is that the trends in the different sectors of the economy at the macro level, both in Bangladesh and India, using 4 decades of extensive data, comprehensive data, which has been developed through the village dynamic studies, show that the trends that the global macro level indicator, which is the gross domestic product, increased 7 times in Bangladesh. Agriculture increased about 4.6 times, almost 5 times, but the share of agriculture has been declining. And service and industry has been growing very exponentially. Now, same thing is happening in India. And if you can find, in this case, look at these numbers, and these numbers is actually a mirror image, where agricultural sector in the natural growth process is losing its dominance, where before agriculture now contributes 35% and employs still a lot, 68% of the rural employment, while non-agriculture now contributes the mirror image 65 of the rural net domestic product and employs 32% of the rural employment. Now this transformation process in time, as you look at data in a time series manner, both at the total aggregate as well as the sectoral in agriculture, crop, livestock, fisheries, forestry, industry, services, gives you the extent and directions of change, the drivers of change, by just looking at the gross state domestic product in absolute terms, the percentage changes, and growth rates. And I have here something for the policymakers, but since you are not policymakers, I'll drive through this very quickly. But this is showing that very high growth process, particularly in Maharashtra, in the last 10 years has been followed now in Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, followed then by Karnataka and West Bengal. And the rest are just following behind. But for agriculture, it's interesting that Uttar Pradesh, the seat of the Green Revolution, was still a seat of Green Revolution in the last 10 years, but then is followed by Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and West Bengal. It's interesting to note that the agricultural sector, the crop sector, in a way, similar in Uttar Pradesh, but I like this result on fisheries, where Andhra Pradesh, whenever I see Andhra Pradesh, it makes my eye pop, that fisheries is now the seat of the source of growth, potentially also in Andhra Pradesh. Now we can go more and on other sectors, the forestry, the industry, and services, but I think it's now important to see and blend this to the drivers of change, and see and blend this at using the perspective at the household level. And this now gives us an opportunity to look at the 42 village level studies, the village dynamic studies in the semi-arid tropics of India, where we have these 18 villages, 32 villages, further villages in subhumid tropics of eastern India, which has a high density of poor, and also in high density of poor in Bangladesh. That opportunity to look at the perspective in terms of rural livelihoods, determinants of income, changes in cropping patterns, these are actually indicators of these changes and what insights we get from them. And if you look at this is the first generation data, followed by the second generation village dynamic studies. And I would say, this is it. We've integrated all the data that we've got. We can choose any variable that we can choose. And in this case, I chose the per capita household income. What does it say? It says that, well, indeed, India is growing. And the growth process has been observed. But also, if you look at it analytically and econometrically, the stagnation has maintained over decades, from the 70s to even the mid-2000. And it's only after mid-2000 that the process of growth has been observed, both at the household level as well as the macro level. And it's also important to note that there are states lagging behind. And which are the states? That their state of poverty even is about the same level. It's now 2014, but it's the state of the poverty level and state of welfare even 4 decades ago in the 70s. And so it brings us back to the question, why Eastern India is lagging behind? And indeed, we have identified these are our villages in Eastern India and Bangladesh. And so it's experienced a stagnation process, but continues to stagnate in time. And these are macro pictures that complements it. I think I'd rather let you see the fact that South India actually has a macro picture per capita household income, which is higher than that of both Bangladesh and Eastern India. But you can see that the share of non-farm income, as people from Bangladesh and East India actually sought to diversify beyond agriculture, even went out of the country, sought remittances through migration, so that the macro picture blends with that. And brings us back to the question again, how is the rapid growth in India benefiting dryland farmers, and what has happened to poverty reduction in dryland areas? And to answer these questions, you look now at one another indicator, income. What are the determinants of income? What are the sources of income? And putting and synthesizing all of data together, again from 1975 to 2014, just for the 6 villages that had this information, you can see that crop production has been the main source of livelihood in the first generation. But after 2000, you can see the diversification, although you can see that crop and livestock production still remain to be an important part of the source of income in these villages. And the increase in income is brought about by diversification, going beyond agriculture. Then that was India. Now we see the same picture in Bangladesh. But then if you look at the sources, you can see here that this orange thing is remittances. This red thing is non-crop. So this means the crop income has remained to be the same, but you have a growing role of remittances and non-crop income in this process. Now, you look further into the disaggregation by crop, and then you will see now the significance and entry point for ICRISAT. What is the role of legumes? What's the role of sorghums and millets? So further disaggregation gives you more picture. And I hope that, okay, after these econometric studies, those stars show that they are important. So whenever you see a star, it says that the land ownership, the improved technologies, assets, and even education are very important. The first 3 for per capita income, the last 4 for non-per, and naturally for the total income. I'm excited to show further disaggregation in crops because this is where we have implications for ICRISAT research. And the changes in time, if you look at the whole synthesis of data from 75 to the present, the last data that we've got in 2015, there's lots of diversification, but of course you can see cotton changing into soybeans, that's in the rainy season. And you've got sorghum shifting into wheat, that's in the post-rainy season. And in Bangladesh, rice remains to be dominating. That's a whole picture. It's very important to see that in Bangladesh, in the post-rainy season, there is diversification whereby the role of paddy has diminished in time. Now furthermore, if you look at down the level of the village, the shift from cotton to soybeans, sorghum is actually declined. This is sorghum, a huge proportion in the 70s. We depend on sorghum as a staple crop, but sorghum declined, and actually groundnut's not even grown anymore. And in that case, cotton dominated until 2016, 2006, and soybean has replaced cotton after that. Very drastic change. Now, why? There's a point in which something intervened. The role of policy, just a mere subsidy of 2,000 rupees, has changed the whole landscape. Now, same thing, change from castor to cotton. Now, it's in this case that we can see that technology, not policy, is technology, BT cotton, when introduced, with a reduced cost of production, lower pesticide use, lower chemical use, has really changed the landscape in this village. And for Kanzara, where wheat is grown, you can see the dependence of farmers on the fluctuating water availability. Whenever there's rainfall, there's wheat. If not, it is replaced by chickpea and oilseeds. So during the bad year, it's good for ICRISAT. Chickpea is grown, it becomes a major crop along with oilseeds, vegetables, and onions. And why? Now, this is where the econometric studies come in, because we pin down and underpin the underlying reasons. And we've identified through our studies, I'll show you some of the results, that profit, technology, and policy through the subsidies are very important. And productivity, some descriptive analysis on profits, wherein we can see that Kansara farmers, through change in the cropping pattern, actually, and adoption of new improved technologies, actually receive income almost 5 times and profits almost more than 5 times. And the oil poly farmers, through changes in the cropping pattern and adoption of new technologies, actually receive more than 5 times the income and almost 7 times that of net profits. Now, the economic analysis, again, indicates what are the driving factors. And you'll see modern varieties, the credit financial flow, infrastructure, and I will see education also as very important, particularly for non-farm income. Now, if we were doing this, it's very important to note the determinants then of farm income are identified as I have summarized. The determinants of non-farm income are identified as I've summarized. It's very important to see, in terms of our conclusions, that per capita income in the rural households has increased. There's no doubt. But there are very specific situations where, like in Bangladesh and in India, mobility, the mobility of the rural population away from farming. And in Bangladesh, it's faster than in Eastern India or even South India. And the share of non-farm income remains significant. And in both Bangladesh and India, in all of the analysis, the farmers are responsive to opportunities. They're very responsive to opportunities via the technologies, policies, and prices or profits. So finally, income in non-farm households increase through the development of and promotion of high-yielding varieties. That's our entry point. But it has to be complemented by others, like accumulation of agricultural capital and farm equipments and resources, as well as education, infrastructure, and access to financial capital. Now, I go now to a book. I'm just, in a way, introducing it. But I'd like to say that through the village-level studies methodology, we have a comprehensive study on climate change challenges. The adaptations at the farm level had been discerned through village-level studies methodology and other methodologies that we have worked with our other partners all over the world. And here we have case studies from Asia and Africa. But before we go to this launching, I'd like to thank all those in this picture, members of the social science team, both in Africa and Asia, and I look out onto you who are there in Africa. You're all here. I thank you very much. And this is a picture I like because it showed that in one of our last social scientist meeting, we're all happy and we are all there committed. And you see in the background, we even have an artwork. And you know what that artwork is? We were asking the question, how can we contribute to ICRISAT? And it is where we have identified that as social scientists, as economists, anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, economists, in process of problem identification, in the process of testing, we are providing inputs to the scientist. We're looking at priority setting from the very beginning, looking at analytics, tools and methodologies, piloting. Let's say baseline studies, oh, you go to the economist, okay? Analysis, impact assessment, learning and feedback, whereby the change process, the upscaling, the adoption, the impact, farm level, local level, as well as spillovers internationally, are measured. We quantify them, describe them, use qualitative dimensions, some modern tools, so that our impact are drawn from various dimensions. And I want to say here through pictures, we also had fun. We had fun in the villages, and I chose this picture out of hundreds. And while I was preparing this seminar, in the words of Jim Ryan, who sent me an email last Saturday, he discovered that I'm leaving, and then he sent me a long email, and I have this, as his further encouragement to move on. He said, you lifted the profile of impact assessment at the time when it was an imperative for management and donors. You then led the renaissance of village studies after that, and you were always responsive to management. In fact, from his point of view, you were the preferred go-to person for presentations to stakeholders in various presentations. And you provided, and lastly, you provided leadership to the economics team over an extended period. In all our parties, I tried to control myself. It was reading this letter that I think it helped me recapitulate the meaning and how meaningful my life was. That's 23 years at ICRISAT. And I'd like to share with you, for those who have not seen it, my husband is not here, but he's listening in KSIConnect. And he said, as I said on Friday when we had a party, I'd like to share June's way of saying, he is also a scientist, retired from ICRISAT, established his career also here. He said after 23 years, parting is really hard on the heart. And let me share with you, it has special dedications, but let me read it as best as I can and as seriously as I can. So June, please listen, you're there. Primal feelings fill me to the brim. Haunting memories mix and stare the elusive, the vague, the indefinable longings of permanence, of frozenness, of fixity. Parting is hard on the heart. A heaviness I feel, a sadness, from that anticipation of the cutting, of the ending, of the getting used to, of being accustomed to, ways established through time. Parting is hard from the heart. Vibrations in my room, setting a soothing resonance, a rhythmic tadadum, rumble of trains. And those who live at ICRISAT, you know this, because there's this train that passed by ICRISAT at night, faint and distant, lull me to sleep. Parting is hard on the heart. And for those who were friends for the last 23 years, and even those new friends, whom I have personally thank you. Even beyond, avenues and streets are the intricate passageways of the old city of Hyderabad. I feel the busyness, the can-do spirit, the restlessness, the energy. Equally, I've been attuned to the goings-on in the bustling city of Cyberbad. Parting is hard on the heart. After 3 years and 20, I find a million bonds tying me to this place. Mary Cummings Park, the 212 building, the flamingos, I love to watch every day until they went away, of the myriad other birds cavorting the Red Lake Sanctuary, and most of all, the RPMIP staff and all the support staff. I said thank you personally to each of you and to all of you that I have known. And especially this poem is for all of you because you've also touched Dr. Bantilan. You send him messages, he responds to you quickly. You send one-liner, he'll respond to you with a poem, right? So a Gulliver, Lilliputians of aroma, of food, of taste, of touch, of sight, of sound, of love, tie me to ICRISAT. I also call my home. Parting is hard on my heart. It is tearing my heart apart. And I thank you very much, Dr. Bantilan and me, thank you for making our life at ICRISAT over the last 20 years 23 years, very meaningful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I always have questions. Could you give ICRISAT some advice about moving forward? You look back on a very good career about impact assessment at village level studies. Where should our investment be going forward around socio-economic science?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, I came to ICRISAT at the juncture, which is like now. In the 1990s, 91, 92, it was the start of a going down scenario, where every year we documented that we lost $1 million in funding every year. And that is what we experienced. When I came in 1992, the year after, $1 million less. When we reached 1996, it was going down and down, and it was so difficult. And so the lessons that we learned, and advice also from our external experts, indicated, hey, you have to hire somebody who will show that in spite of this, you're achieving something. That's why the impact assessment expert was. So that was my first thing. We have to be very serious. There was a time when the seriousness of impact assessment waned. No, we just took it for granted. We have been cited to be the best in CGIAR, and we have documented this, and we took it for granted. And there was a time that there was no funding even for impact assessment. I, as a leader at that time, had to search for funds to do impact work. And I have to run to the breeders to say, there is this potential, but there is no funding. You have to justify it. And therefore, the institutionalization of assessment, of monitoring, the uptake process, the adoption process, the conditions for impact is a must. We should not forget it. When the Impact Assessment Office became independent of MIP, of Socioeconomics and Policy, it was a decision made that yes, we are in the brink, and therefore we can just do the external assessments by our consultants, but it did not give us benefits. It is the internal capacity and the seriousness of the scientists themselves with enhanced capacity and, how do you call it, culture? We call it impact culture. That even as we start any research, as we envision any project, we already envision what that real impact can be. Let's not dream for millions and millions that can't be achieved. Let's dream about something that can be achieved because of our knowledge base, because of the stock of knowledge that we already have. At that time, I was pulling my hair about what is this stem borer and what is your sorghum midge, and that's something, that insect that is lodged very nicely in there. It's difficult to. It's all of those potential. What scientists can do, they promise they can do. In pigeon pea research, our scientists say we can do it, but it will take 10 years. Our chickpea scientist says we're in the brink of success, but I waited for that brink of success after 10 years. No. It's very important that we have a serious mechanism whereby our ex-ante or potential or expectations are brought to bear by solid data, and that's brought to bear by the evidence of impact. And that complementarity is very important. That makes us alert that we are in the brink of success, or there are certain things that we cannot do. Simply impossible. So while pull our hair or not, So the priority setting exercise is very important. Our colleagues who have been doing this, and research management have been very alert on this. But it is that investment in time, investment in resources, and capacity within ICRISAT and the NARS is critical. That's just one point. I'll give you advice on other points too.
Through history, which I was also a part of. But more than that, the question I have is, you have shown that, the impact, for example, for the ICRISAT crops, we had impact when we had profitability, when we had a crop fitting into a cropping pattern or fitting into the cropping sequence, or due to early maturity and so on. These are some of the factors that you said led to adoption, higher adoption. And obviously higher adoption means some impact meaning otherwise farmers will not adopt something. But going into the future, do you think that these same factors will still continue, what you found earlier, will continue to be important for ICRISAT crops, or are there any other important factors for any of these crops which the crop scientists need to look at more critically from the point of view of impact? So I know it's a not an easy question, but at least I was wondering, if not for all 5 crops, 1 or 2 crops, can you say what is it that was not there at that time which will now be important going into the future?
Thanks, Partha, for that question. Environment, our domain, our research domain, is not static. Actually, and knowledge base and science is also not static. It keeps on growing every day. And our environment automatically comes to mind is this perception of change, including that of the change in climate, are real. This is not a story anymore. And therefore, we have to anticipate those kinds of changes. And that's the reason why we have global futures and global foresight. We look at that foresight that can happen in 50 years. And that draws on from the data that we know now. Okay? The case of climate change is one, where at the time when we went to the villagers and asked about farmers' perception, the farmers were saying, we don't even care what will happen 10 years from now. You're asking us something in 50 years. We're more concerned of what is happening now. What will the rains come now? Will the prices be as we expect? This is what is their concern. And they respond in that direction. So we have to be worried that farmers' perceptions and their responsiveness takes into account a very short-term perception scenario. Now, but their perception right now is growing because they see evidences. If you watch, there is this Al Gore with this effective presentation of the heat growing as if, he even goes up the stairs exponentially. It's very convincing. Now, even the appreciation of this kind of data, whether it's real or not, depends on the way in which this data is presented. Now, climate change is real, and ICRISAT is responding to it. Okay. Now, as a last example, I know Partha, when he asks question, he will not deal with very general answers. Chickpea, for example, is a case where, and where's Kumar? Kumar, are you there? Yeah, Kumar. And I had a very wonderful experience going through the chickpea area where chickpea was not grown before. And years hence, because this happens to be his village, years hence, where chickpea is as far as your eyes can see, what has happened? That was brought about by research. We have anticipated that with the trends in the downward scenario of chickpea in the north, given the fact of the huge subsidies for rice and wheat and so on, chickpea did not become important anymore. And chickpea has been replaced by rice and wheat, and all of those are remunerable crops because of the subsidy. And our scientists anticipated. Chickpea cannot be grown. The traditional chickpea cannot be grown. The ones in Punjab cannot be grown in Andhra Pradesh. No way, because it's long duration. It's sensitive to climate, to cold, and so on. And so we produce a shorter duration that just enough to fit in the short season of the South. And this is where you can see with that anticipation. Years ago, where chickpea has grown exponentially. Really, the data is showing it's exponentially. And we have generated the statistics that show, and in fact, it's one of the well-cited in CGIAR right now. That work is in the CGIAR highlight impact features. That this is an example that the CGIAR can do research through anticipation. There's an example of groundnut, but let's talk about it in dinner time. There are lots of examples like that.
Yes, thanks Cynthia for your thought-provoking seminar. You didn't mention IMOD, now Inclusive Market Orientated Development, and you had a picture up there of some poor farmers in Sahel, I guess. Where do you think IMOD fits in these areas where there's severe market failure?
Yeah, I have another presentation on IMOD, but there is a way in which I introduce it in my presentation. In fact, it's an added dimension among my considerations before. I was the leader of the development of a challenge program called SMART. SMART means stimulating markets through the agricultural transformation process. It went through up to the last stage of development. And you know who beat it? Who beat us in SMART? It's a challenge program on climate change. We were competing. And I was beaten. We were beaten for that. But, you know, it's the work that we have done in ICRISAT and the concept of markets, which, if not stimulated, will answer the question that confronted me when I first came to Niger. There's a Nyangado who's a breeder in, I think, Niamey. And he said, Cynthia, you come to see me in my office, you're telling me you want to measure the impact of pearl millet and sorghum in Africa, particularly Niger. And he said, don't expect anything. Nyangado later on I met because he became the breeder of the national program and then breeder at Monsanto or something like that. And he said, the reason is that our staple crops are grown and they're eaten. But if you grow more of these millets, there will be no way by which these millets can be marketed because these markets are not existent at all. So if you are not to stimulate markets, then the stimulation of production to produce excess crops beyond the consumption of a subsistence farmer will not bring you to impact. And that was an instance when across the table, I can't believe it. He said, there's no market at all. It's even non-existent. So the first thing that we need to stimulate and make workable is markets so that it stimulates the economy. That's the concept by which we say we have the engine of growth through the markets. And that will stimulate production process to make excess production that can be sold in the market.
Cynthia, we have a question that's come in from over the system, from Jariel. And it's a good point. On your point on feminisation of agriculture, what did you find?
Oh, okay. Usually, informally, when I get the question, I pass it on to Padma. Okay, but I'll not do that now. Okay. My realization of feminization of agriculture actually is real. And it was not in India. It was actually in Zimbabwe. Because it's in Zimbabwe where I started a conference on village-level studies and really started to undertake the village-level studies in Africa. And the first thing that I saw, groundnut is a very important crop in that area of the world, is that groundnut is so important, especially When I talk with the ladies, groundnut is their crop. They take care of it because they say it's the source of their income for which they establish their independence. When they grow up, when they get married, by the way, the good land goes to the men. The bad land, and I saw it, the rocky ones, the infertile ones, not having enough access to water, goes to the ladies. And that's real. And I didn't realize that's also happening in India, but if I realized it in Zimbabwe. And when the women works on the land, makes it workable, grow something, the men will say, whatever you grow is your income. Okay? Now, in that process of interacting with men and women, it's also in Zimbabwe that it has been experiencing economic downturn. And the men do not find livelihoods through agriculture, through other means. So they go to South Africa. Okay, when they go to South Africa, the farm is still there. Who stays in the farm? So maybe at this time when there is a nice mobile, the men can communicate, hey, you buy this fertilizer and so on, this kind of seed. But at that time when we were experiencing it, the women were left behind to deal. And I saw the pictures wherein in the field where the lady with a baby on its back tilling the land while the husband is far away in Beitbridge or in Cape Town looking for work. So that the feminization of agriculture is not a myth, it's a reality. Padma has lots of examples of that. So, but I'll not give you a chance to that today.
Okay. Thanks, Cynthia, very much for the presentation. Thanks for taking a few questions. I know we have a book launch to do, but before that, again, let me come up here.
Yeah.
Yes. Before we go into the book launch, again, Cynthia, thank you very much for your contribution to ICRISAT. As I said in my introduction, my belief, and in our discussions, you are retiring, moving back to the Philippines, but not leaving the ICRISAT family. You'll be staying in contact. We will see you back here because of your continued interest in the mandate of ICRISAT for small farmers. And so this is leaving one stage of your career, entering another stage of your wonderful career. So thank you very much for all you've done for ICRISAT. We wish you best in this next phase and we look forward to continuing to interact with you. So everyone, please join me in thanking Cynthia for this career and for the seminar today. And it's so great to see so many of your team here to hear about this reflection. So I'm going to pass over to you now for what you want to do in terms of launching your book.
Please stay with us. It's very, very pleasing to see that we have an opportunity. I've been bidding this with Peter since December, that we have a launch. We wanted to do it during the annual day, but it was not possible by the nature of the annual day. So we thought we should not, we should always take the opportunity to thank those who have been involved globally and for them to speak. It's now that I would like to invite Navin Singh and Nedu Maran and we have our partners from the national program also. So Navin, please come, and Nedu. And Baijesh. Where's Baijesh? Okay, so let me introduce, and you've met before. Baijesh is here. We have V.M. Rao of CRIDA, as well as Venkateshwarlu of CRIDA. We've got John Antel of the University of Oregon. Of course, we've got Lieven Claessens of Africa, and Dr. Berger from Germany. But I'd like to give an opportunity by which, first of all, please don't put it down. I still have something to show. Okay, so Navin, please if you can introduce it. I'd just like to show something on there, which they have. Go down.
It'll go up and then come down.
I want it to go down because I want to show something.
It's going to come back down.
Okay. There is this, just 3 slides. Okay, while you're doing this, we have a whole team from all over Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia who work very hard. The most who have worked very hard on this are the ones in front of you. We had a project funded by Asian Development Bank. It was called, initially it was called climate change. Vulnerability to climate change and adaptation strategies at the farm level. It's done at the time when this matter of climate change was not yet, how do you call it, a flavor of the month. It was just emerging, especially the words resilience and vulnerability were just emerging, and the measurements of that were new. And now after years of working together, Naveen was here as our scientist, Dr. Naveen P. Singh. Dr. S. Nedumaran was a student at the time who went on to Germany. And this climate change challenges and adaptation at farm level is something that originated as a work for India alone. But it expanded across many countries in Asia and many countries in Africa. And I would like to just show that I'm sure that Naveen would have something to say here, that the book emphasizes the importance of farm-level adaptation in mitigating against the risk of climate change. It highlights farm-level impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, and discusses methodological approaches by our partners. And it discusses livelihood strategies for poor farmers across Asia and Africa. And we have encompassed both quantitative and qualitative approaches to understand climate change impacts, adaptation, options, and vulnerability at crop and household level. And it has become a valuable reference it's been written to be a valuable reference for development practitioners and researchers for climate change and its consequences. So Naveen, with that, I'd like to give the floor to you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, this is very, so I'm into both means of display for the, I was here 5 years back, and when I left ICRISAT, so this mission was incomplete. So I thought of completing this mission. Well, this took a lot of time. This took almost 3 years of my time. And when we commenced this journey, so it was not an easy task because we had ventured onto a virtually new field. As I'm a social scientist, venturing onto this area was not an easy task. So when we approached a couple of publishers, Cabby, Francis Taylor, as well as Macmillan, we were not very much hopeful, but we thought that let us send this manuscript to all these three. Fortunately, within 1 month, we got a positive response from Cabby. But they did tell that you need to broaden the canvas of this book and include African context as well. For that, so this book basically contains 12 chapters. 6 chapters are meant for Asia, 3 for Africa. 2 chapters are one each for way and forward as well as well. Now, this book has evoked a lot of response. 2 of the major publications, one from WMO, World Meteorological Organization, Geneva, they have published one policy paper from this book, as well as NAS, National Academy of American Sciences. They have also published policy paper from this work. So this book has evoked a lot of response, tremendous response, and I am thankful to Cynthia for giving me this chance to complete this task. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, Nadu.
Thank you, Dr. Cynthia and Dr. Naveen. Actually, most of the things are said. As a team here, we work together. When I joined ICRISAT, this project was already on in Asia, and then I had some experience in Africa when I was doing my postdoc. So that's where the linkage happened to be part of this book. So I actually pulled some of our work in Africa through some colleagues in Ghana, and also from AGMI project from Livens from ICRISAT pod. So we wrote some case studies for West Africa and East Africa, and able to publish this in, through the book and contributed. So I thank the ICRISAT, Dr. Cynthia and Dr. Naveen to give this chance to be part of this book. Thanks.
Okay, can you give us the honors of opening the package of books? Okay, so it's expanding from the list of publications that we have produced in the recent months or years. So this is the newest one. And so Kabi International is running after us again for another book. So this is the one. Thank you very much. So, so we'll have copies of this, and we can hold one each, okay? All right, this is the protocol.
You're the senior editor. Take one with the editors. Do the editors. Take one with the editors.
Oh, okay. Come on, Naveen. What possession. And thank you for staying and watching us. And we hope, as we promised Peter, we'll have another of this in December. We have to work very, very hard to produce another book. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks Cynthia, thanks Naveen, Madam Aaron. It's great to see a book like this come out with a partnership between our national partners and ICRISAT on a really critical topic. If our Director General is here, and he's sad that he can't be, he would be very supportive and passionate around the role that we have in dealing with climate change as a real and serious issue for the world. So I'm looking forward myself to reading the book. Thanks again for the seminar this afternoon and for the book launch, and we wish you well. Thanks everybody. I think that's the end of formal proceedings.
Thank you very much.